If it's Wednesday, lawmakers inch closer to getting a gun bill to the president's desk as they brace for more fallout from more January 6 hearings. The latest developments on both stories and what it says about the state of our politics in just a moment. Plus, the president unveils a new plan to try to tackle gas prices, but even leaders in his own party aren't convinced it'll work. We'll speak with a White House senior advisor about whether Americans could finally get a break at the pump. And later, Goodell on the Hill, the NFL commissioner and son of a former U.S. senator, testifies before lawmakers as new details emerge on the investigation into a football franchise's toxic workplace at the nation's capital. Good day. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for streaming with us. Right now, lawmakers in Washington are grappling with two very different kinds of emergencies. The first is the rapid-fire revelations that are coming out of the January 6 committee hearings, which have, frankly, cast a disturbing spotlight on the unhealthy state of our politics in America. The second is the epidemic of gun violence in this country, which has finally led to a real effort to do something meaningful in the wake of so many tragedies just in the last few months. Together, though, they paint a stark portrait of the current challenges facing Congress and the country at large. Today, the January 6 committee announced that its hearings are now going to extend into next month, after saying they've received more tips and more information as the hearings have unfolded. This time tomorrow, the committee will be in the middle of its fifth hearing. That one is going to focus on President Trump's efforts to use the Justice Department to potentially help him overturn the election. But all of this comes after yesterday when state election officials testified about the sustained pressure they faced from President Trump, his associates, and even his supporters to throw out the results of the 2020 election and simply proclaim Trump the victor. Here's Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers, a Republican, who testified yesterday.
I said, look, you are asking me to do something that is counter to my oath when I swore to the Constitution to uphold it.
But you had told President Trump you would not do anything illegal for him.
I did, both times.
Bowers and other witnesses also described the attacks they faced from Trump supporters. One person talking about somebody broke into their daughter-in-law's house simply because they were doing their jobs. This is the cloud that's hanging over our politics, this anti-small d Democratic force out there. It's defiant. It still enjoys substantial support despite facts uncovered by work of this. Yes, it's a bipartisan House committee. At the same time, there's a potential bright spot amid all our darkness these days in politics. A possible sign that as unhealthy as our body politic is right now, it's not comatose. A bipartisan group of senators have agreed on legislation related to guns. It's a package of relatively small reforms that everyone acknowledges doesn't tackle the full scope of the enormous problem. But it's a step. Congress finally appears poised to pass something of substance related to guns for the first time in nearly 30 years. And it may not be the bill that lawmakers wanted, left or right, but it is a bill that can actually do something they don't do very often, which is pass.
As a whole, our goal is to save lives without infringing the rights of law-abiding gun owners, and I think we've hit that mix.
So, listen, this bill is a compromise. It doesn't go as far as I would like to go. It certainly goes further than a lot of Republicans would like it to go. But there is no doubt this bill is going to save thousands of lives.
Folks, what does bind these stories together, the January 6 hearings and this compromise on guns, is that they are both the work of a handful of adults that are here in the room in Washington. The problem facing our politics is that it seems there are fewer and fewer of those adults left. And those relatively sunny days are becoming a rarity as our future in politics looks darker and darker. Joining me now on Capitol Hill, NBC's Ali Rafa. On set with me, Democratic strategist Basil Smikle and Commentary Magazine editor John Podhoretz. Also with us is Politico national correspondent Betsy Woodruff Swan. Ali, let me start with you on Capitol Hill. What is this gun bill and what isn't it? Right? And I say it that way because I know it doesn't touch the weapon, but it does make some changes to the law on how to purchase it. Run it down for us.
Yeah, Chuck, so we heard from the two top negotiators of this bipartisan deal, Republican Senator John Cornyn and Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, both of them really mirroring each other and saying that this wasn't exactly what each side wanted, but there is bipartisan agreement on these provisions in this bill. It stops short of, obviously, a full-on assault weapons ban or lowering the minimum age, raising the minimum age to be able to buy an assault weapon, but it does come to an agreement on provisions like expanding child and family mental health services, offering incentives for states to implement their own red flag laws. It also bolsters crisis intervention programs, closes that boyfriend loophole. We heard before senators left last week, really one of the sticking points here was the language around what defines a domestic abuser. Republicans asking for some not so broad language around that. This also strengthens background checks by including juvenile records for people under the age of 21 trying to purchase a gun. And so there's several things that, like I said, senators didn't get, but there's widespread support for this already. As you mentioned at the top there, this was an initial vote to get the ball rolling on this last night that garnered the support of 14 Republicans. Would have been 15 if Senator Toomey was there for that vote. He was one of the Republicans who originally backed the framework of that bill.
Allie, any indication that the numbers could grow among Republicans or shrink? As you know, the NRA came out officially opposed, but I think the NRA is more concerned about looking, worried about other gun groups going to their right. So I don't know how effective their opposition is. They're opposed to it. Are they actually working to flip members or not?
So on the Senate side, we're seeing, Texas Senator John Cornyn talked about this today. He expects that the Republican support for this bill to already be locked in. So that's 14 with only room to grow. Then you see on the House side, whenever this does get to the House side, we're expecting a vote on the Senate side either tomorrow or Friday. We're already seeing House GOP leadership put together this effort to whip Republicans into an opposing vote. We heard from House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and Whip Steve Scalise already today. Also, Elise Stefanik committing that she will not vote for this. But there is widespread support in the House. And Chuck, as you know, this doesn't need Republican support in the House to actually get passed if Democrats all fall in line and vote in support of this. So whenever that does happen, we do expect around 10, 15 Republicans to fall with Democrats in support of this bill, Chuck.
All you have to do is find the Republican members of Congress who represent districts that Joe Biden carried, and you can start with that. Will likely be the list of House Republicans that vote for this compromise. Allie on Capitol Hill for us. Allie Rafa, thanks very much. Let me turn to my panel here, Betsy, Basil, and John. Betsy, let me start with you. The reason I twinned these two things together today, it was sort of like, if you look at our politics with one eye, you think, oh my God, right? You watch the January 6th hearing. You hear Brad Raffensperger talk about his widowed daughter-in-law's house getting broken into. You hear the horrible things that were done to Shay Moss and her mother and grandmother. And you think, we're a tinderbox. And then I'll be honest, I don't want to be so negative and think that, hey, the fact that they got a gun compromise is not, it's small, it's narrow, it's all the things everybody says. But, so how sick are we? Put us on the, is our body politic, how unhealthy is it? We're not dead. I guess that's the good news. But how close to death are we?
That's a great question. And I think, first, the fact that Congress is so incapable of doing almost anything in an election year, which is every 2 years, is a problem that's only grown more acute with time. Part of the reason and part of the result of that, of course, has been Congress on a host of issues trying to foist its responsibilities to the courts. This is why more and more the decisions that shape American life the most are not made in the Capitol building, but across the street at the Supreme Court and through the executive branch's regulatory function. And of course, the horrible problem with that is that the executive branch and the judicial branch, of course, are wonderful, but they are much less democratically responsive than Capitol Hill is, and then members of Congress are. So when you have Congress just trying to abdicate responsibility to deal with a whole host of issues, in the aggregate, on the whole, it means that the U.S. government is less democratically responsive to voters. The other thing that I think we have to note with this is it also just points to a yawning chasm between House and Senate Republicans, both January 6th and this gun rights bill. January 6th is a great example. You have Kevin McCarthy pushing Liz Cheney out of the Republican Party, and at the same time, Mitch McConnell donating to her reelect. House and Senate Republicans, their leaderships practically can't fit in the same room anymore.
Basil and John, best of times, worst of times, right? I feel like you look at, again, if you look at the gun bill and I say, well, maybe this is proof that if you work at something hard enough, or the cynic in me says, if you have two back-to-back tragedies where kids are mutilated and people are targeted for race, then that's how you get Congress back.
Well, I'm more the cynic, because I honestly, when I was 12 years old, I was shot by a 14-year-old. And I said then the same thing I can say now. Why does a child have a gun? And this bill doesn't really do anything to answer that question. And I understand that government practices incrementalism. I get that part. But this is the time where we need sweeping legislation. There is nothing in this that closes that iron pipeline. So I am still very skeptical. But I understand that if in an era where very little can get done, and to the earlier point that so much gets pushed off onto the courts, that Congress at least can come together and do one thing that puts a brick in the wall. But the truth is, what we needed was sweeping change, and we didn't get that.
But I think what Betsy said responds to what you're saying, which is that if this modest bill can pass, where bipartisan legislation has not passed for years, that's an indication that efforts to go big fail because there is no national consensus on them. This will represent the first national consensus on the need to do some moderation on unlimited gun rights in 30 years. And it is almost unassailable in the sense that because of its modesty, it will be very hard for people to say this is a wild arrogation, wildly unconstitutional arrogation by Congress of individual rights and individual liberties, because it really isn't. You can say whatever you want, but also because 16 it's 14 now, but it could be 16 or 17 by the time the bill is passed. That's a pretty substantial thing. You know, we haven't seen it, and so that will represent a new consensus.
We haven't seen it on a social issue. We've seen it on spending issues.
Yeah.
Oh, always.
You could always find bipartisan.
Well, we got 69 votes on the infrastructure
That's right.
bill,
If it's
right?
because we're spending money.
But I also think, and I hear what you're saying, and I agree to the extent, but there was a moment when at least you can count on New Yorkers, for example, or people within the state supporting the state. So when you have Elise Stefanik saying she's not going to support this, that concerns me. When you have someone like Congressmember Jacobs, who's representing the Buffalo area, right after the shooting, saying he supports gun control and then has to resign, that's a problem.
Well, we got a little breaking news on that front, Betsy. And what if I told you that Donald Trump put out a statement calling Cornyn a rhino and saying he's recommending being against this gun bill? Is that a person who just knows who his base is? Or will that matter to some of these elected Republicans as they contemplate whether to vote for this legislation?
Big question for Senate Republicans, without a doubt. On the House side, my guess is that Trump's opposition to this bill is not actually going to change that many hearts and minds, because it sounds like McCarthy and Scalise kind of beat him to it. If anything, this strikes me as Trump trying to kind of engage in some bandwagoning, being in favor of what was going to happen, which was conservative House Republicans calling this bill nightmare, Gestapo, gun control, gun confiscation, hell on earth that's coming. Trump doesn't want to be to the right of those people. The other thing to remember with Trump, of course, is that support from the NRA was a huge part of the reason that he was elected in the first place. The Gun Rights Association spent a massive amount of money in 2016. They spent much, much less in 2020 because of atrocious internal management, financial management problems. And if you're Trump, you look at the gun issue and you think, the gun people really love me. Maybe I'm going to be on the side of let's not do anything about guns.
Yeah, no, he does not benefit from ever moderating. No, I mean, it's not good for his brand. I don't mean it whether it should be good for the party. He doesn't benefit, right, John?
No. And what's more, I mean, the thing is that the Senate, the people in the Senate who have agreed to this framework they've already discounted Trump. I mean, the only real person who has something genuine to fear maybe is Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, right?
But she may have done the right vote for that election, right? Because she needs second choice Democrats.
Right. So because they have
ranked choice voting.
Yeah, they have ranked choice. So, but I mean, she is the only one. If you look at that slate,
Todd Young, but it's after his primary.
Right.
Yeah.
So the House is a little different, and so I guess there is this idea that they can get, as you said, the sort of the Biden Republicans in the House.
Look, Don Bacon, the Omaha.
Yeah.
You know, we know he's got a Biden district. He was on my show a couple weeks ago. He sounds like a guy that's looking for a reason to vote for this bill.
Right. But in the end, I mean, Trump's bandwagoning has been his approach in this election season, jumping off Mo Brooks and jumping onto Katie Britt so that he can claim a victory. But in this case, he has to say Rhino, also because he doesn't want Tucker Carlson to get ahead of him. He doesn't want...
That's true. Hey, let me pivot a little bit to January 6th, because Quinnipiac asked a terrific poll question, and I definitely plan to get our folks to steal it. They asked whether, in 2020, do you believe Donald Trump truly believed there was voter fraud, or do you believe he deliberately wanted to spread false information? So the overall number is 48-43 in favor. More people think he was deliberately spreading false information than not. Now, let me take you to the party divides. Among Democrats, only 7% thought he was doing it because he really believed it. 86% believed he was spreading false information on purpose. Numbers almost completely flipped among Republicans. 77% believing he believed it, just 17. Which brings me to the all-important question, Betsy. Does the January 6th hearing break through at all? Is this more proof it does not?
I don't think it does. I've talked to two separate Democratic members of Congress in the last couple of weeks about January 6th. Obviously can't say who. And both of them have said offhandedly, nobody gives a bleep about January 6th when they're talking about their districts and the way that elections play out. The reality is, obviously, it's a very important issue. Obviously, like I've been covering this nonstop for the last year. It's important. It's a key part of understanding American history and the democratic trajectory that this country is on. It is also true at the same time, and not at all contradictory, that it's not a top-tier voting issue for people who are figuring out who they're going to support during the midterms. Top-tier issues are material concerns. How are people paying their mortgages? How much does it cost to get milk and bread? How much does it cost to get gas? Do these hearings result in different electoral outcomes for Democrats? I have yet to see any actual evidence that they do.
Very quickly, my measurement is whether Trump's ever the nominee again. Right. That, to me, is success.
And here, right now, I would say I'm a conservative. I was skeptical about these hearings on the first night when Liz Cheney said Trump and his people engaged in a 7-point plan to overturn the results of the election. I thought, Trump doesn't do plans. He doesn't count to 7. This is an overreach. I'm going to say this, that as these hearings have progressed, I don't know that they're ever going to get the connective tissue where Trump says, I don't believe I won, but you better do this anyway, which is the thing they need to have the conspiracy so that in his mind, he's not delusionally thinking that he won anyway. I don't think they're going to get that, although who knows with this documentary film footage that has now been subpoenaed, but they are getting closer to laying out a circumstantial case than I, as somebody who has granularly followed this from the minute that it happened, than I thought they would, and I think it is going to have a corrosive effect on Trump, even though people on the right don't really want to pay that much attention.
It can damage Trump, not Trumpism. Very quickly, Merrick Garland, how hard is his life going to become?
Oh, incredibly difficult. But, the committee has given him everything that he needs. Problem is, and this is where, let's go back to this issue. One of the reasons that Democrats feel like this is a great civics lesson, but what's going to come of it, is there real accountability? Merrick Garland doesn't act and really push forward, and Democrats don't feel like he's that engaged. It's a problem.
Look, I don't want to repeat it, but if you haven't read the Jack Goldsmith op-ed in the New York Times that sort of goes through the should he or shouldn't he on Merrick Garland, just read it. It's a very compelling argument. I'm not sure where I land yet, but it is worth your time. Basil, Mike, and Betsy, thank you all. Ed, and J-Pod, of course, coming up. President Biden calls for a 3-month gas tax holiday, saying it's going to curb surging prices. The plan's already facing criticism from every side. A senior advisor to the White House and a top Democratic senator join me after the break. Plus, the Supreme Court could overturn Roe v. Wade any day now. We'll have some exclusive reporting on how one swing state governor is already making plans for a post-Roe world. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. This afternoon, the president called on Congress to pass legislation that would suspend the federal gas tax for 90 days in hopes that it can bring some relief to Americans at the pump, especially summer vacation and driving season. The proposal, which would suspend the 18-cent per gallon tax, is being met with a mixed reaction on the Hill, left and right, believe it or not, even from leaders of the president's own party who are skeptical. Speaker Pelosi said she will, quote, see where there may be consensus. Steny Hoyer said he's not sure the gas tax holiday will have the intended effects. In an already tough political environment for Democrats, poll numbers show gas prices and inflation as the top issue for many voters ahead of the midterms. Today's action is the latest move from the White House to try to address gas prices, including the announcement in March to begin releasing 1 million barrels a day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Joined now by Senior Advisor to the President, Eugene Sperling. You know, Gene, it didn't take long for many of my colleagues, and of course myself, who covered the last Democratic administration that you worked for. President Obama once called the gas tax holiday a gimmick. Why is this not a gimmick now, in your view?
Well, thanks for having me on, Chuck. And look, this is not a proposal for all seasons. It's not a proposal for normal times. You know, when candidate Obama made that comment, he was responding to a proposal by candidate Clinton. And it was during the financial crisis where that was truly the central issue of our time. Right now, what the central issue is how we are recovering from this unprecedented pandemic. And one of the issues that we have faced is that at a time when prices might have been moderating, we've faced this unthinkable aggression from Putin and an appropriate response that has driven gas prices from $3.31 in January 17th, when Putin started doing military exercises in Belarus, to near $5 right now. And so the president has made clear that, and you've already mentioned one of the issues, that he's going to do everything in his power to help provide relief for Americans at the gas pump while still standing strong against Putin. And that's included the historic release of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It's included allowing E15 gas to be available this summer to put downward pressure on prices. And yes, it is including these three things he asked today. Suspend the federal gas tax for 3 months, which is 18 cents. Call on states that have benefited from surging revenues and surpluses to suspend their gas tax, which could make it 50 cents a gallon. And then ask refineries, oil refineries, who are chalking up record profits, to put those profits to work, expanding capacity, bringing capacity back that they shut down in the previous 2 years, and to do everything they can and should at a time of war to make sure any savings from lower oil prices or lower gas taxes benefit the consumers it's desired to benefit.
Look, the issue is the refineries, right? Everything that our research has shown up that this isn't about, we have the oil, we just don't have enough places to turn the oil into gas. But expanding capacity at refineries takes years to happen. This is capital investment. So, you know, they could say they're doing it right now. It's not going to impact the consumer, no?
Well, you know, Chuck, let's remember that this same industry took down 1 million barrels a day of refinery capacity, 800,000 of those.
There was no demand, right?
2020.
Because there was no demand.
Yeah, but the point is, they took down capacity. We want to explore everything we can do. Look, what you ask of us,
capacity's back. Right?
Let me just say, what you ask of us, what the American people ask of us, is do everything you can. You know, we are sending them a strong message, but the president also asked Secretary Granholm, our Secretary of Energy, to meet with the industry tomorrow and have a constructive conversation that would include getting all of their ideas and understanding, is there capacity they could bring back online? What could they do, what can they do to do their part in a time time of war to relieve prices at the pump, just like anybody is asking of this White House or the United States Congress. You do everything you can. There's no silver bullet, but that doesn't excuse you from taking all action that you have an ability to take.
So you still are going to go to Saudi Arabia and hat in hand and beg them to turn on the spigot?
Well, look, the president obviously has and his foreign policy team have worked to, encourage more capacity. We think, more production. We think there's 200,000 more barrels per day already committed by kind of what's called OPEC plus. In terms of this, the Saudi Arabia visit, I'm going to let my colleagues on the national security team talk more about the larger goals of that. But there's no question this president is trying to do what we can to expand oil supply. And when he put out 180 million barrels a day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is 1 million for 180 days, he did call on the rest of the world to at least put in a third of that so that we'd be at 240 million barrels. So look, this is a time of war. We want to stand strong on Putin, but we want to provide relief at the gas pump for Americans. And so we're looking for things that fit into that, road.
Right. The larger issue is inflation. The gas price is the neon sign, right, that tells you about inflation. So I understand wanting to tackle that. Why not rebate? Why not $500 in rebate cards versus suspending of the gas tax, which feels, because now you're going to have to raise taxes in 3 months, right before an election year. It sounded like you guys were debating sending basically a $500 rebate card instead, which could have helped somebody decide maybe it helps with gas, maybe it helps with groceries. Why not do that?
Listen, anything we're doing here is temporary. We're trying to deal. As I said, this is not a proposal for all season. It is a temporary measure being done in a time of war, a very exceptional period where a military conflict, an unthinkable one, has driven gas prices up around the world, including in the United States. As opposed, in terms of other ideas out there, I think the president's going to be very open. In his speech today, I think he mentioned one of the governors who did give that type of rebate card. But this is, I think, a proposal that he thinks the American people would support, could get bipartisan support. But I'll also say we've been very clear. We're not taking ideas off the table. If people want to work with us in ways to provide relief to American consumers while standing strong against, the attack on democracy in Ukraine, we're going to be open.
Eugene Sperling, one of the chief economic advisors to President Biden these days. Gene, it's always good to get your perspective. Nice to see you, and
Chuck,
thanks for having us. I know you're dealing with a ton of rain, so thank you.
Thank you.
You got it. I'm joined now by Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. And Senator Kaine, we originally were going to focus first on foreign policy, the Saudi Arabia trip. But I tell you, the gas tax holiday politics sort of hits really close to home for both of us. I'm a Virginia resident.
Right.
You're obviously a senator from Virginia. Governor Youngkin just last week was trying to convince the Democratic-controlled Virginia State Senate for a gas tax holiday. They said no. He's, of course, gloating today. Hey, Virginia Senate Democrats, do what President Biden wants you to do. It does seem as if the president is in one place and a lot of Democratic legislators, whether on the state level or the federal level, are in another. Fair?
I think that's right. Look, we're looking for solutions, Chuck, and I don't have a problem supporting President Biden on the gas tax holiday, although I think there's a better way to come at this, and I'm going to talk to my colleagues about it. I think what we ought to do is have an excess profits tax on the big oil producers who are raking in record profits and rebate that tax, 100% of it rebated back to consumers. This isn't to grow government, and it's not permanent. But while gas prices are at these really high levels, let's go after the oil companies that are raking in excess profits and give the money right back to everyday people. You don't take money out of the Transportation Trust Fund to do that. If you're going to have a vote in Congress anyway, why not have a vote that would really put dollars back in people's pockets because of these high gas prices? That would be my preference. I don't have a problem voting for a temporary cessation of the federal gas tax. I don't give advice to my state senators about what they need to do with Governor Youngkin's proposals because I don't want them telling me what I should do in the U.S. Senate. I'll listen to them. They can listen to me. But I think that there are some better ways to handle this. Some of the other ways that the president announced today, encouraging more domestic production, that's important, even looking at measures that he can do it. These are really important. But the one thing I wouldn't do, I wouldn't go have a sit-down meeting with MBS in Saudi Arabia. I'm very opposed to that idea because of his demonstrated involvement in the assassination of a Virginia resident journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, who worked for the Washington Post.
What circumstance would you have sat down with MBS?
I would sit down with MBS only after there was some accountability for his involvement in this murder. That doesn't mean I wouldn't talk to the Saudi foreign minister. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't meet with the King of Saudi Arabia. President Biden has a long-time relationship with him. But MBS has a bloodstain all over his hands. And our intel community and those of other countries have basically said that's the case. And you can't, well, what's the biggest battle in the world right now? It's how much we let authoritarians get away with in Russia and Ukraine, for example. So since that is an existential issue right now, I don't think you suddenly say that a guy who killed an American resident journalist, well, I guess we got to talk to him now because gas is at $5 a gallon.
Right.
No, we don't. We're the United States of America. We don't have to talk to him.
Well, isn't that how Saudi Arabia why MBS feels untouchable? Is that at the end of the day, he's got the black gold that he thinks the Western world needs, and at the end of the day, it's sort of like, you need me more than I need you.
Yeah, but Chuck, that used to be the case, and that's the way he thinks. That's not the case anymore. We don't need him. We don't need the oil. We got plenty of production of our own. Again, we can deal with the king or the foreign minister. We can deal with the trade minister. But when somebody thinks they have us over a barrel, I don't want to deal with that person. And my worry, frankly, is an MBS is going to have a meeting like this and then laugh behind our back at the meeting. So I think meeting with him in particular is an absolutely horrible idea. Now, I'm biased. I'm a Virginia senator, and I got members of Jamal Khashoggi's family that live in Virginia. But again, what is the big battle in the world right now? It's how much we let authoritarians run roughshod over democratic values and human rights. And I don't think we can, stand strong against Vladimir Putin and then just turn a casual shrug of our shoulders toward MBS.
Senator, are you starting to wonder whether these oil sanctions are even working on Russia? So here we are. In some ways, we've raised the price of gas on our own to confront Putin. And in theory, that all makes a lot of sense, except it hadn't worked yet. He's now selling oil to China and India.
At escalated prices.
Yes, he's making more money. Now, maybe it's a short-term gain, but it does feel as if these sanctions have boomeranged.
Well, I would say, Chuck, you got to look at this as a whole package. It is energy sanctions. It's canceling Nord Stream 2. It's humanitarian aid and military aid. It's Finland and Sweden, after decades of not wanting to be part of NATO, saying, we're coming into NATO now. Let us in as quickly as we can get in. It's Vladimir Putin's maximalist war aims to decapitate the Ukrainian government and take it over, now shrunk to a tiny corner of eastern Donbass and Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea. So all of these together, the U.S. and our allies, and I give the Biden team great credit for pulling it together, is having a dramatic impact on Vladimir Putin and Russia. It's not having the impact that we want as fast as we want, and that's the tragedy of it, but it is having a significant impact. So I think you need to look at all of these sanctions together.
No, I get that. I guess I wonder, are the energy sanctions the self-defeating ones? Is that what we're learning? That, look, as much as it felt good in the moment to say we were doing an oil embargo on Russia, it just wasn't. It turned out it just isn't feasible.
Well, it's not feasible so much in the short term, but look, people are learning lessons, and I think they're learning lessons about the need to wean themselves away from petro-dictators, whether it's Vladimir Putin or anybody else. This is a time where sometimes high gas prices, make us want to produce more, but in this instance, high gas prices driven by an authoritarian are pushing innovators in the United States and around the world to go stronger and stronger and stronger into low and no carbon energy. Painful in the short term, it's going to be good for the environment and good for our national security in the long term.
Democratic Senator Tim Kaine, it's always a pleasure to get your perspective. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much, Chuck.
You got it. Up next, Potential fallout if Roe v. Wade is overturned. Some women are sharing their stories with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer ahead of the coming Supreme Court ruling. Some exclusive reporting we're going to share amid Whitmer's response. And why are we focused on Michigan? Because Michigan is a state that if Roe's overturned, a ban is in place immediately. Total ban. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Some Democratic governors are working to protect abortion rights ahead of the Supreme Court decision in their states, which is likely to invalidate Roe v. Wade, and it could impact different states in different ways. The decision could come as early as tomorrow, though we assume it will be the last day that the Supreme Court issues rulings that we'll get this one. But in Michigan, if Roe is overturned, abortion would become a felony according to a long dormant law. And when we say long dormant, we mean it. Gretchen Whitmer filed a lawsuit challenging the 1931 law that's on the books. Whitmer is also attempting to get an abortion referenda on the ballot in November that would affirm a constitutional right in the state of Michigan. Governor Whitmer spoke exclusively with my colleague Dasha Burns earlier today after she hosted a roundtable on abortion rights. Dasha Burns joins me now. So, Dasha, there's no doubt, I think Governor Whitmer knows that whether she wants it to be front and center for her reelection campaign or not, if Roe is overturned because of the unique trigger law in Michigan, this becomes issue one for a lot of voters in Michigan.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the governor has really been using every tool in her toolbox. Chuck, you listed some of them there. I mean, look, you've had red states enacting trigger laws in anticipation of the Supreme Court ruling. You've had Democratic states trying to fortify abortion rights. And then you've got purple states like Michigan, where you have a Democratic governor, but you have a Republican-controlled legislature. And they are going to be in a protracted legal battle here and political battle as we've got an election coming up in November. You're right, Chuck. This 1931 law, it has been largely irrelevant. It's a law that people had really forgotten about because after Roe v. Wade, it became moot, right? But we're in a different time now, and the governor has filed a lawsuit to try to invalidate that law. She's issued an executive directive telling state agencies to shore up reproductive rights, but it's going to come down to court decisions. It's going to potentially come down to that ballot initiative if it does get on the ballot in November. And today she held a conversation with a group of women, folks from across the political spectrum, people with diverse backgrounds. You had a Republican woman there who was advocating for abortion rights. You had a pastor. You had a woman who shared a heartbreaking story about a pregnancy that endangered her life and the difficult decision that her family had to make in the wake of that. The governor at times holding back tears. And after that roundtable, we sat down to have a conversation about this issue. Take a listen to just some of that interview.
I think it's a very precarious moment. You know, I was raised by a pro-choice Republican. We had a pro-choice Republican as a part of our conversation. And yet the Republican leadership in our legislature is trying to intervene in my lawsuit. It's really scary because we have this tendency to say, you know, the COVID-19 was a she session. It took this disproportionate impact on women. We got to get women back in the workplace. You know how you do that? You empower women. You don't take our ability to make the most important economic decision we make in our lifetimes away from us. We have got to use every tool at our disposal to make sure that women still have bodily autonomy and the right to full reproductive health care.
And Chuck, just hours ago, some GOP lawmakers here in Michigan filed a proposal to enact 10-year prison sentences for abortion providers in the state. So this is going to be a major battle. Already it is, and it's going to become even bigger as soon as we hear from the Supreme Court, Chuck.
Dasha Burns in Michigan for us. One of the states we make her home away from home at times. Dasha Burns, thank you. And if it's Wednesday, it means somebody voted somewhere yesterday. Here's some of the key results that we got from yesterday's runoff and primary elections in a handful of states, featured some rather salty concession statements. In Alabama, Donald Trump eventually got on the right bandwagon as Katie Britt topped Mo Brooks to win the state's Republican Senate nomination. Trump originally backed Brooks, but then rescinded his endorsements when he saw Brooks sagging in the polls. Later, he gave his support to Britt when he saw Britt winning in the polls. Brooks gave a scathing concession, if you will, statement saying, the voters have spoken, but they may not have spoken wisely. I left out the even saltier responses there. We got another salty concession statement last night, this one from the left, with progressive Democrat Jessica Cisneros conceding to Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar. She called the forces against her candidacy, which she said included the Democratic establishment, a, quote, corrupt political machine. But she conceded to that corrupt political machine. Those are some harsh words, and the frontline district Democrats will need all hands on deck to hold in the fall. Elsewhere, over in Georgia, two of Trump's House picks who ran on his big lie about the 2020 election, they lost their runoff elections, including former Democrat and MAGA favorite Vernon Jones, who lost by 50 points in a runoff. That's really hard to do. Overall, not a great night for the former president at the ballot box. I'm guessing he wishes he never went to the state of Georgia ever again. Meanwhile, in the District of Columbia, we have a new mayor for life. It is Muriel Bowser. She won the district's Democratic primary, all but assuring her a third term in office. That makes her the first mayor of D.C. to win a third term since the original mayor for life, Marion Barry's tenure. Up next, new criminal charges. We have breaking news on why a once rising star in the Democratic Party has now turned himself into federal authorities. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Andrew Gillum. He was the former Tallahassee mayor who grabbed national headlines in 2018, narrowly losing the Florida governor's race to Ron DeSantis. He won a primary shockingly when the progressive movement came in for him at the last minute. Well, he's been charged in a 21-count federal indictment. The charges include wire fraud, making false statements to the FBI, involving fraudulent fundraising. The indictment marks a new low for the once rising progressive Democratic star who withdrew from public life following a 2020 sex scandal. Our senior national political reporter, Marc Caputo, was one of the first reporters on this story today. And look, the fall of Andrew Gillum sort of had already been taking place, and this feels like quite the coda here. But it's quite the coda. I mean, as you and I were talking on my podcast this morning, you know, the butterfly effect of Florida politics. Andrew Gillum, we only know who he is because a bunch of national progressives, Soros, Steyer, Sanders, came in at the last minute to help this guy out, beat the Democratic establishment, and Florida Democrats haven't recovered since. Tell us about Andrew Gillum.
No, they have. Yeah, well, they haven't. One of the reasons that he was such a progressive heartthrob is that Andrew Gillum is incredibly charismatic, a great speaker. And Steyer, Soros, the collective PAC, which is dedicated to electing black candidates, he hit all the right notes. He fit the bill perfectly. And there was a sort of perfect storm in the 2018 Democratic primary where Gwen Graham, the daughter of the former senator and governor, Bob Graham, in Florida, looked like she was going to win. And everything came together at the last minute in this crowded primary and enabled Gillum to pull ahead for two reasons. One, he had the progressive vote, which isn't that big in Florida's Democratic primary. But he also had the support of black voters because these various entities were able to advertise to people like, look, here's this dynamic first ever African-American nominee or likely to be nominee if you vote for him. Black voters are 29% of the Democratic primary. It all came together. Almost as soon as he started running in the general election, against Ron DeSantis, DeSantis started hitting him over two things: socialism, being too much of a socialist because of his connections to Bernie Sanders, and Gillum didn't do much to push back on that. In fact, he didn't even answer the question when he was asked if he was a socialist or not, or if he were a capitalist. And then the second thing is that DeSantis laid into him over corruption because of this investigation into City Hall. Gillum denied all along that he was under investigation. Well, we now know today that indeed he was. Early on in 2016, undercover federal agents, FBI agents, were posing as corrupt, shady developers, and individuals associated with Gillum were trying to arrange ways to funnel payments from this fake corporation to Gillum in return for favorable consideration at City Hall. Some of those charges look a little thin in the indictment, but the overall pattern here is kind of a widespread, sprawling, corrupt network that Gillum allegedly ran with his mentor, a woman named Sharon Letman Hicks, for at least 4 years, in which they kind of fleeced donors, tricked them into giving money, pretended they were going to deposit at one place, deposit at another, and then found a way to funnel money to Gillum through Letman Hicks's P&P communications.
Yeah. This story feels so familiar. Meaning, you know what I mean by that? Meaning, you're just, my God, it's like, how many of these politicians they somehow think the money they raise belongs to them at some point in their lives.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that when you're a politician and you're being lauded by people and people are handing you money, money is power. It can be difficult for some people to not realize, like, no, I'm not supposed to steal this. Now, we don't want to convict Andrew Gillum before he's convicted. It does look like the 21-count indictment, it's usually hard to beat each one of those counts. We'll see how he does. But Letman Hicks is about 10 years his senior, and she was with him the entire time. I'd heard for years a lot of people in Andrew Gillum's sort of inner circle in his campaigns didn't like the way she managed things. They didn't think she was a straight shooter. And a lot of those terrible low-mean suspicions, at least in this indictment, look like they're well-founded.
Well, this goes back to the big question was he well vetted? And this goes to all this national, these progressive groups all got involved. They didn't know him. They weren't sure. They don't know who they're. And now, in some ways, they've poisoned the Democratic band, particularly in South Florida.
Yeah, I wouldn't lay it all at their feet. The reality is that Democrats in Florida have been doing a great job of messing things up without the progressives, and this just seemed to be sort of a coup de grace. Now, things can change here rather remarkably, but for the time being, the Democratic Party has been laid pretty flat on its back here. There's not a lot of life in it. So there's not a lot of hopes that whoever wins the Democratic primary, whether it's Charlie Crist or Nikki Fried, will beat Ron DeSantis in the general, but we'll see what happens in the election when people start voting.
Look, when people get to the presidency, they always have to run into a little bit of odd luck somewhere. Barack Obama did, the butterfly effect. Ron DeSantis avoided Glenn Graham, became governor, yada, yada, yada. We know where he is today. Marc Caputo, it's a fascinating story for so many reasons. Marc, thank you. But guess what? There's more of Marc Caputo, as I hinted at, and his politics and reporting on today's episode of the Chuck Toddcast. Get it wherever you get your podcast. Let's turn now to the accusations of a different kind of bad behavior. The NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, who happens to be a son of a former senator, by the way, appeared before Congress this morning. He testified remotely about an investigation into workplace harassment and sexual assault accusations against the team in the nation's capital, the Washington Commanders, and team owner Dan Snyder, and how the league handled them. Goodell told the committee that Snyder's behavior was the worst he's seen in his 40 years working in the NFL.
Is Dan Snyder's behavior and the workplace culture he created and fostered one of the worst and most toxic you've seen in your time as commissioner and your decades of service with the NFL?
I have not seen a workplace in the NFL that is anywhere near what we saw in the context of that period of time for the Washington Commanders.
Now, Snyder himself refused to participate in the hearing. His spokesperson told NBC News it was, quote, a politically charged show trial. The committee chairwoman, Carolyn Maloney, announced she'll issue a subpoena for Snyder to give a deposition to the committee next week. Now, Snyder's refusal to appear before the committee comes after new reporting from the Washington Post that in 2009, a former female employee accused Snyder of asking her for sex and groping her on the team's private plane. Snyder denied the allegation, but the Post reports the team paid this employee a $1.6 million settlement 3 months later. It came, of course, with a non-disclosure agreement, apparently. I'm joined now by Will Hobson. He's the investigative reporter at the Washington Post in the sports department. Will, I want to get at something Goodell said. Because it's the follow-up question that I don't think was asked at this committee hearing. If this is the worst workplace he's seen in his time in the NFL, then why was the Carolina Panthers owner, Jerry Richardson, who was accused of some credible workplace and personal history, why was he forced to sell his team, but Dan Snyder still is the owner of the Washington Commanders?
I think folks with knowledge of sort of how the league internal politics work would say that there are different political dynamics that work between those two different situations. Jerry Richardson was much older than Dan Snyder. I think allegedly wanted to sell the team anyway, so was sort of just pushed to sell a little earlier than he'd intended. Dan Snyder has no intention of selling the team. He wants to pass it on to his children. And I think it's just well known that any attempt to remove him from ownership would result in every last legal battle from Mr. Snyder and his attorneys.
Why did Roger Goodell participate? And I say this because it isn't clear what Congress's role here is. Now, I understand they want to get more, they were trying to surface more information. But I felt, obviously, the NFL decided he should testify. What was behind their thinking of having him cooperate?
That's a very good question. Those of us who've been covering the story since the beginning wondered, it does appear there's been sort of a changing dynamic between the league and the team. Back in 2020, when this most recent series of scandals started, the team and the league were pretty much in lockstep in how things are going to be handled. And in the last few months, that's changed, and the league office has demonstrated we perceive to be a little bit of annoyance with the team, and so I think that continued today with Commissioner Goodell appearing and speaking candidly at times, and Mr. Snyder being allegedly off in France.
A subpoena of Snyder, obviously he'll try to fight it, but for how long? And do you expect him to have to be forced to sit down and give a deposition here?
So I haven't done any reporting in this area. I am certain, based on my interactions with Dan Snyder's lawyers, that whatever legal challenge they can issue to a congressional subpoena, they will. So I'm as interested as anyone else to see how this plays out.
And do you sense, it's interesting, because of Goodell's participation, they've already, and they already adjudicated him once. Is this a hint that more punishment may be coming?
That's within the realm of possibility. There have been new allegations about Mr. Snyder that have come out through these House committee hearings that the NFL has hired an attorney to conduct a now second investigation in 3 years of the Washington Commanders front office. And it is definitely possible, if she issues findings that any of the allegations against Mr. Snyder actually occurred, that the league could punish him again. How come the league doesn't look at the Washington situation as a business problem and say, this guy's toxic, the fan base is retreating, it's not a good business in Washington, and oh, by the way, they can't find a stadium, which cost us the ability to host a World Cup game. At what point do they look at this situation and say, this is bad for the NFL? I think there probably are folks in the league office who do feel that way, but the NFL, Commissioner Goodell can't just unilaterally remove an owner. And the real people in charge here is the majority, or what the majority of NFL owners want to do. And at this point, based on reporting that my colleagues have done, there's only a small number who think that a removal of Dan Snyder from ownership is merited.
Not to be cynical here, but it's sort of do unto others as you want done unto yourself. And these other owners sort of look at Snyder, hey, that could be me.
I think so. I mean, I think they don't want to set a precedent that having a bad front office could result in your removal from the league.
Will Hobson of the Washington Post with this story that's certainly of concern to a lot of us Washingtonians. Will, thank you. And thank you all for being with us this hour. We'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News coverage will continue with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.